Welcome back. It's time for Black and White, like I said earlier on, and today we're discussing cremation as an option for burial rites rather than the traditional burial, of course, that many of us were accustomed to. Now, statistics and reports are indicating that more and more Kenyans are preferring this as a way to send off their loved ones or preserve their loved ones. And there are very many things that are feeding into this as a trend. Of course, some religious, such as the Hinduism, actually stipulate that this is the way to go, but of course we have many more religions in the country that are not really into cremation, but with economic times and it being a trend and personal preference of the people, if they knew they were about to pass on, are requesting for this as a right. Various prominent Kenyans have actually opted for this, and they have had this in their wills, and we're just going to take a look at the numbers and also the pros and cons of cremation. And of course this is informed by recent events. Now let's see some of those statistics, or the definition actually of cremation. And this is the disposal of a dead person's body by burning it in ashes, typically after a funeral ceremony. In some instances there is no ceremony, but of course typically it is after a ceremony. Now, some of the proponents of cremation say that it is cost efficient. It is a cost efficient option because it rules out all the requirements that go into having elaborate ceremonies, feeding lots of people, having lots of people coming over, traveling over. Some people just decide to have the cremation happen, a tiny ceremony, and that's over and done with. Now, the portability of the remains obviously is another pro because, well, it's much smaller. It's put into they rule out the need for a casket and what have you. And then it is said to be good for the environment. Then aside from that, it is simpler and much quicker, as some would put it. Let's move on. We also have the cons, a lack of closure. Some people associate seeing their deceased body as something that puts a full stop or the final nail to the coffin, no pun intended. It also frowned upon by some African setups because we have often practiced the act of burying someone in the soil or someone's body in the soil, but then cremation is seen as un-African. And then the conflict owing to religious or traditional beliefs. Some people have spent months on end in courts trying to go against perhaps somebody's will, who the person said they want to be cremated, but then their friends and families feel this is un-African, and therefore it causes a lot of conflict, and sometimes even the clergy is involved in that particular conflict because they feel it is not right to have a body burnt up. But of course, if the person called for this, then they have no option but to do it. So some of the prominent Kenyans that have resorted to cremation, we have Jeremiah Kiriaini, as you can see right there on the screen, Kenneth Matiba, who is a pro-democracy icon from the 90s. He was cremated in 2018, if I'm not wrong. And then we have Jane Kiano, who is the former Maendeleo ya Wanawake leader, who was also cremated. We also have let's see some of the other prominent Kenyans who were cremated. Wangari Maathai opted for this. This was in 2011, if I'm not wrong. And then she was absolutely, she was a proponent of the environment. So we have been told earlier on that this is some of some proponents feel that cremation is good for the environment. So it would come as no surprise that, of course, she would opt for this because she was very pro-environment. And then last but not least, we have Archbishop Manasseh Kuria, who him together with his wife actually were cremated, and this resulted actually into some conflict with the church, and then it delayed his burial or his send-off because he expressed he wanted that, but of course the church felt that this was not the right way, and of course resulted in a lot of debate. Now, joining us for that discussion is Tom Otieno, who is the Reverend of the Anglican Church of Kenya, based at the Lavington United Church. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much indeed. Cremation.
Yep. Quite a big topic right now in Kenya because of recent events. We had Safaricom, former boss of Safaricom, Bob Collymore, being cremated. We also have acclaimed author Binyavanga Wanaina, who was also cremated. Now, as a member of the church, you do preside over many of these ceremonies. What is the picture, in your view, of cremation, the state of that in the nation?
Well, the state of it in the nation is that it still remains largely an elite person's affair. It has not, let's say, it has not trickled down to the masses.
Yes.
Because the manner of disposal of a dead body is still hostage to two things.
Yes.
Two considerations. First, the cultural tradition of the people in question,
Yes.
or the person in question, which includes the family values.
Right.
And then number two, the manner of functionality. Is it practical? Is it, what is the perception that you create from that?
Yes.
So those are the issues that usually come into play. You still prefer because it's normative.
It's normative.
But cremation, though convenient, is not considered or looked at as normative by many sections of society.
You do say that it is something that is a preserved still of the elite.
Yes.
And is it a question of exposure? Or what is it that makes the elite more likely to opt for cremation while the common Mwananchi is a bit averse to it?
I think it's a question of they subscribe to a totally different culture. The questions on their hearts are not existential. They're not talking about food. They're not talking about what they're able to talk about. Many other things. But I think secondly, it's just a different culture. They have a different culture.
Yeah.
And they don't. They are not held hostage to what people consider normative.
Normative.
And most of the time, people in elite society have done a will. Ordinary Kenyans do not. Usually death just catches them by surprise. So people are left, scrambling and fighting on how they should dispose of the body. But most of the elite society have even organized their funeral and said how many people should carry their casket and who and what. So they even organize their funeral. They write their own eulogy. So there's a lot of it's a whole mindset thing.
Yes.
And it's a traditional thing.
But then when you consider the economics of it all, you would expect that the common Mwananchi would even prefer this, because you'd have I'll refer to an article from the Standard where one Robert Mwania, who has worked at the Kariako crematorium for years on end, has cremated over 8,000 people. He says that it would cost a person of African descent, 40,000 shillings to get that done. But when you look at the expenses that go into a normal funeral, it might be 10 times that amount, because you have to cater to the guests, you have to feed them, you have to think about the coffin, everything that is involved, even outfits and what have you. So when you look at the two against each other, economically speaking?
Economically speaking, there's no comparison.
Really?
Because, burials are much more expensive and much more emotionally engaging and draining. People burials because of traditions and their culture. And because it is considered normative. There's also something coming out of the Christian faith. Of course, the church does not have one position on this.
Absolutely.
What we look at is, is this has been the manner that we have done things, the way we have done things as a church. We have always buried people. But when Archbishop Manasseh Kuria opted for cremation, that introduced a debate in the church.
There was an uproar.
And that debate, unfortunately, was more emotional than it was rational. But when it settled down, it became very clear that the scripture does not forbid cremation
in any way, shape, or
but
form.
because of the tradition that had been practiced, Christian tradition over the years, burial is normative and is preferred by more Christians.
Absolutely. We even have some church leaders being buried inside churches or on the church ground, just the closeness with the church. So I'm curious about the emotional aspect of it. What is it about burials that provides so much closure as opposed to cremation, that many people feel like they would rather see the body follow the rites? What is it about closure and the grieving process that makes a lot of us prefer burial as opposed to cremation?
It is the way we view dead bodies. Most African societies dead bodies are not dead. They are somewhere. So okay. That's why you find in some traditions, including the one I come from, some cultures, they actually talk to the dead body. Yeah. And I'm not saying it's right.
Yes.
I'm just saying that is what happens. So it has everything to do with how they perceive that dead body.
Yeah.
That dead body is not useless. It has a lot of dignity. The way that they treat it is very, very important. That's why you find in many African traditions, they will take that dead body and put it in the house, and it will spend a night.
Yes.
Which basically ritualistically is saying he's spending his last night in his house.
In the home or the house,
and then, then he'll be buried next to his house, which means he has been buried in his home.
Yes. So
okay. It's a manner that the Africans viewed dead body. When it comes to Christians, we also have a theology of the body, where the Bible says that our bodies are not ours, they are purchased. Our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, and all that. So in the Christian tradition, the body is far more dignified than just being a shell that holds the soul and the spirit. But then
when you pass on, your soul rises from your body. Therefore, what is left behind is, as we put it,
is the body.
Shell.
And that's where all the discussion is. Is what is the state of the body at death?
Exactly.
And that's a question that has occupied Christian thinking and discussion and discourse for a long time. There are people who believe that manner of death and or the manner of the body is very important, that it should be treated with dignity. In fact, the word cemetery came from a Greek word cremateria, which means a sleeping place. Cremateria. And it was the Christians who initially had these sleeping places. They considered the dead body to be asleep. And that at resurrection it would be caught up. They did not want to.
It's not a disposing place.
They didn't consider the body to have lost value just because the soul had left it in death.
But today, in let's take the example of Nairobi, where we're having cemeteries that are packed. We're having people. If it's a sleeping place, then people are sleeping atop each other because there's no space. Absolutely.
Correct.
Why isn't it a trend just based on the money that you'd have to spend?
It's because you can never, when it comes to matters of death and burial or disposal of dead bodies, they are never functional discussions. They are sentimental and cultural.
Emotions are running high.
They're sentimental and cultural. And traditional. So the debate changes completely. You can't tell someone that they can't bury. They don't care whether they're going to bury on top of someone else.
They just...
At that point, what's important is what they believe about the body, whether it is with value or without any value that it can be cremated.
And is there a sentiment also attached to being able to go somewhere and saying, this is where my loved one is
a lot of it. In fact, that's why people do all kinds of things to the grave. They cement it, they
flowers.
They put tears on it, they put an epitaph, they put a cross, they put a fence on it. Why? Because of memorials. They would like to go from time to time and just have memories of the person. They want to have a place of reconnect where they can go and not necessarily speak to the dead person, but remember them. So those are now the discussions, rather than is this practical?
Is it practical?
Is this cost
We'd rather
effective?
pay all this, but then have
a place because it helps you moving forward. For most people, it helps them moving forward.
Which is closure.
For others, because of their mindset, they think very differently. They don't see any value in the body after death. So they say whether it's or not, you can actually have the crematon. The ashes, the crematon, you have it, put it in a container, you can dispose of it in
the ocean. Some people in a river, or
in the way you do,
depending on what the person might have asked for.
But for the most of the masses, especially in India, cremation is still far.
It is far from
there.
Now, one of our media practitioners, a renowned was interviewed recently, and he spoke exclusively to one of our local TV stations and described that he explained that the temperatures that are used, there are different ways of actually, and of course the prices range from 20,000 all the way to 100,000. A local worker at the Kariokos crematorium also said that Africans are increasingly turning to this, and they're charged around 40,000, while the rest, the Hindus that traditionally do this, are charged much less. And of course the or they use fire, and at least 40 liters of diesel is used in this. Now those are just the details of the whole process, and the ideal is that you have an ash-like substance at the end of the day to put in an urn if you so wish as a family, and take it away with you and bury it or do whatever was stipulated in the will, or alternatively leave it there, I guess. Now, Reverend, you have, Otieno, you have actually witnessed this. It's, for us, it's just things that we read on the paper or in articles, people quoting and telling us what happens. For you, please paint us a picture.
Well, I've done several cremations. Of course, I will not mention who, but I've done several cremations. And what usually happens is you wheel the body into the holding area. If it's Karioko, you wheel it into the holding area. If it's Langata, there's also a holding area.
Right.
Because those are the only two places right now.
And there's a picture that we've been showing in studio on the Super right to your right. Is that as an accurate depiction where we were defining the disposal of a body? Is that an accurate depiction?
That's
of
an accurate depiction.
Yeah,
that I think is by firewood. That's Langata.
Okay.
That is Langata.
Langata crematorium.
Langata is where they do it by firewood. In Karioko, they do it
electrically. So this is
there's a mechanism.
So you switch it on and then
excuse me. Once you switch it on, the thing just starts on, and you just hear the hum of the machine as it disposes. So what happens is there's a holding area. That's where you do the prayers, and if people want to view, they will view, and then you ensure that people have done their final rites, so to speak, and that they are ready to allow the body to be wheeled into the the incinerator.
Yes, and by final rites would be maybe blessing the body.
That's why now we do the liturgy, the prayers, the what, and then we allow the family to come. Some of them will want to open the casket and maybe even touch the body and cry. So we just leave some kind of time there for people to just do their final thing. And then when they're done, we close the casket, wheel it in, and it is put in the incinerator.
Right.
But the person that lights that fire or switches it on is next of kin. If it's a wife or a husband or a child or whoever is appointed, that is the person that puts on that fire.
Okay.
The incinerator.
Now, according to one of the guys that work at Karioko crematorium, he says that children under the age of 10, this doesn't happen to them. Do you have any insights into this? Yeah,
most people do not prefer to cremate their children. They prefer to bury them.
Yeah.
I guess because for children the trauma is greater for those who lose children, and they prefer to have remembrance rather than to forget the whole experience. So I've never done any cremation for a child. No.
Yeah, and of course he says that more and more Africans are turning to this. I mean, I'm curious about the inner workings of the mind of somebody who writes a will and wants this. What do you think is informing them? And also, just before you answer that, there's also a trend whereby we are having smaller and smaller funerals. You're having an invite-only funerals. You're having funerals that are guarded. We don't want too many people viewing. Some even say they don't want politicians attending their funerals. What is influencing this trend?
That's a functional approach to funerals.
Yes.
It's functional because it saves cost. It also gives privacy and dignity to the entire process, and then does not allow for interference and sometimes a violation of the space. Because sometimes when you have politicians and then they bring politics into that space, The family feels violated, but they do not say anything because they are not in a position to say anything, but they feel violated. So it's basically protecting their interests. Invite-only funeral is a bit of a stretch.
It is a stretch.
It is a stretch, and it is actually not fair. People should be allowed to mourn.
Yeah.
You can control the manner in which they mourn. You can refuse to give a microphone to a person who you think will violate space. But you cannot stop people from coming, or you should not stop people from coming to mourn. So the privatization of that process is undesirable.
Absolutely.
Actually, it is counterproductive, if you ask me.
Okay, then. Morning Express is going to be taking a short break. When we get back, we're going to take a look at the inner workings, and I hope Reverend Otieno can paint us a picture into the people who actually request for cremation, what is influencing them to do this. We'll be right back.